L'Enfant, back in 1791, I believe, was when he was designing the city of Washington. There was an idea for a church for national purposes that would be built on the Mall. That was to be centered with the White House, with Congress, and that never happened, of course. But there were those who had that vision of wanting to create not only an Episcopal church, but a church for national purposes in Washington, D.C. And so in 1893, Congress chartered the Protestant Episcopal Cathedral Foundation to create a cathedral and several institutions of educational institutions, which have become National Cathedral Girls' Schools, St. Albans, and Beauvoir. And the charter for the Episcopal Cathedral Foundation was it would be a place of religion and education and charity. So it really has its genesis with that charter in 1893, which is an interesting, if you think about it, the separation of church and state in this country. And yet here you have Congress chartering a religious organization. So we always keep this funny balance between being an Episcopal church, part of the Diocese of Washington, D.C., the seat of the presiding bishop in the Episcopal Church, and also at the same time a church that does have a national role to play. Although, of course, we receive no funding or support from the federal government of any type. Well, from an Episcopal Anglican point of view, I think the Episcopal Church has always done such a good job of being a big tent. We've always been good at making room for lots of different people and lots of different points of view. What we believe is connected with how we worship, as opposed to lists of doctrine or statements of faith that one has to sign. Of course, we have the creeds, and those are foundational to who we are, but we're a fairly wide open place. For this cathedral, as a house of prayer for all people, why it was originally Episcopalian is because historically the Episcopal Church was often the church of leaders. It was the church of the political elite in this country. And so it was a natural in that day late in the 19th century. Bishop Henry Yates Satterley was the first bishop of the Diocese of Washington. And it really was his vision to make this church for national purposes happen. At the same time as the diocese was being carved out of the Diocese of Maryland, the Diocese of Washington was forming, he put together a group of lay leaders. Many of them were real estate folks who were in this area of the city. And he had this immense dream of being able to build this cathedral. He personally guaranteed a large portion of a loan to purchase the acreage on top of this hill. Whereas the original church L'Enfant envisioned was down at the Mall, that was no longer feasible by the time this idea was being developed. And they found this beautiful acreage up here on tract of land adjacent to St. Albans Church. And it's so fascinating to me as I think about him. He had a vision for a place that he would never live to see completed. And he was willing to stake his own private fortune to make that vision a reality. The cathedral has been built over 83 years by the gifts of hundreds of thousands of people around this country in $10, $20, $30 increments, some of them in large bequests or gifts, but mainly in small gifts of people, many Episcopalians and others who loved the idea of a beautiful Gothic cathedral being built in the heart of the nation's capital. Church for national purposes is a vague term, really on purpose in some ways, because the cathedral has functioned over the years in many different ways as a church for national purposes. It tends to be the place where we come together as a nation in one way or another to celebrate, or in one way or another to mourn. It's been a series of presidential funerals, national moments of grieving, and also since Franklin Roosevelt has been the place for the inaugural prayer service for the president following the day after the inauguration. So we see it functioning in those ways primarily as a church for national purposes. But we tend to have a lot of folks who serve in government, elected officials who are here at the cathedral for one event or another, one service or another. So we tend to have a lot of the folks in Washington who are in government service attend here as well. Many cathedrals will tell the history of the faith, and this cathedral is no different. We start at the at the front doors of the cathedral on the outside, looking in with creation and the beautiful stonework. And then we work from Genesis all the way up to the resurrection as you move from the west to the east of the cathedral. But the National Cathedral also tells the history of America in its windows, in its iconography, in the state seals are located in the cathedral. Every state seal is represented. Every state flag is in the cathedral. So we try to hold together not only the history of our faith, but the history of the United States. Gloria, Gloria.